I just want to welcome you all to BSides 2021 here in Perth, and thank you all for being here, both in person and online. I'd also really like to thank all the organisers, the sponsors, University of WA, all the volunteers involved in putting this event on. It's absolutely awesome to be able to present to you all. So a little bit about myself. I'm Anthony Jones. I'm a security consultant with Kinetic IT Protect Plus, and I've been in various risk management roles for the previous 10 years. I'm obviously passionate about cyber, hence why I'm here, but I'm also very interested in history and what we can learn from it to help guide us in the future. And it was the combination of these two interests that provided the inspiration for my topic today, and I hope you all find it interesting. So my presentation today is Spears, Enigmas and Quantum Computing, the evolution of encryption and war. So today we'll be taking a look at the role of cryptography through warfare throughout history, including some of the key cryptographic moments in history that had ramifications not just for wars, but for also greater society as we know it. We're then going to take a look forward at quantum computing in the context of cryptography and what that might mean for the cyber wars of the future. So first up, we go all the way back to ancient Spartan warfare. So from about 700 to 400 BC, Spartan military officers utilized an ancient encryption technique called the Cryptography cipher. So the Cryptography cipher involved wrapping a piece of leather or cloth around a rod or a spear before writing a message, and then to decrypt or read the message, you had to rewrap that leather or cloth around a rod or a spear of the same diameter. This enabled Spartan military officers to send encrypted messages to one another via messengers, with some protection against those messages being intercepted and the information being used against them. Next up, we move all the way forward to World War I. So during World War I, there was a plethora of encoding and encryption techniques utilised, and one of the most popular was code books. So code books would have hundreds or thousands of phrases written in them, each with an associated number up to 5 digits, so that when you wrote a message, the phrases you used were simply replaced by the associated numbers in the code book. There was also something called super encryption utilised, which was when a message was first encoded using a code book and then encrypted using a simple substitution or transposition cipher. Now, to paint the picture a little bit, in January 1917, World War I had been raging for about 3 years and was effectively in a stalemate. Both sides were engaged in horrible trench warfare, with neither side gaining much ground without tremendous loss of life. At this stage, the United States had remained neutral in the war and had not engaged outside of selling supplies. So this all changed with the introduction of this innocuous-looking telegram. So the Zimmermann telegram was sent by Arthur Zimmermann, who was a German foreign affairs official in World War I, and the information it contained would arguably change the course of the war. The telegram was sent across a 2-part journey, firstly from Berlin to the German consulate in Washington, DC, and secondly from Washington, DC to its ultimate destination in the German consulate in Mexico. Unbeknownst to the US or anyone else at the time, the British had actually tapped the US diplomatic lines that ran between Europe and the North Americas and had intercepted the Zimmermann telegram on the first part of its journey. However, due to the telegram being encoded with codebook 0075, which had only been partly cracked at the time, they were only able to decode a small part of that message. That small part, though, was enough for them to realise that what they had could potentially change the outcome of the war. So the British were now in a conundrum. They had partly decrypted a military intelligence that were gathered by a means that they needed to keep secret. So they came up with a plan. They bribed a telegram official in Mexico to obtain a copy of the encrypted Zimmermann telegram. And now, by either luck or design, when Germany had transmitted the telegram, they had effectively committed a downgrade attack on themselves. This was due to the German consulate in Mexico not being able to decrypt code 0075. This led to the telegram being rewritten in the less secure code 13040, whilst it was in the US before being sent on to Mexico. So this meant that the new Zimmermann telegram that the British had obtained was able to be fully decoded. Once decoded, the British handed the telegram over to the US, alongside with the cover story of having a spy in the German consulate in Mexico who had obtained it. This cover story was ultimately effective, and the British continued to spy on the US diplomatic lines for another 25 years. So this is what the Zimmermann telegram looks like decrypted or decoded. Germany were offering Mexico, the states of Texas, New Mexico and Arizona as part of an alliance in the event that the US joined the war, as well as announcing that they were going to begin unrestricted submarine warfare, including against US merchant vessels. Now, initially, the US thought that this intelligence was fake until Arthur Zimmermann himself came out and admitted it. So what were the consequences of this telegram? The US received the decoded Zimmermann telegram in February 1917, and on April 2nd, less than 2 months later, they declared war on Germany and officially entered into World War I. By November 11 the following year, World War I was over. Now, I'm not claiming that the Zimmermann telegram was the only reason for World War I's outcome or for the US entering the war, but according to official war historians, it played a pivotal role in both. So to summarise, the British performed a man-in-the-middle attack against the Germans, whilst the Germans performed a downgrade attack on themselves, the result of which arguably changed the outcome of World War I. Next up, we have World War II and the Enigma Machine. So the Enigma Machine was originally invented in World War I by another German Arthur Scherbius, and it was used extensively by Nazi Germany in World War II. It was an electromechanical rotor substitution cipher, where each rotor inside was effectively an alphabet. The basic machine operation was you would press a key or a letter on a keyboard, the rotors would move and complete an electrical circuit, and a light would appear above another letter. Those illuminated letters were the ciphertext. Now, what made the Enigma Machine so successful were the keys utilised. So the keys were the different possible configurations of the Enigma Machine itself. These included the order of the rotor starting position, the plugboard settings and more, and in total provided an estimated 3 times 10 to the power of 114 possible machine configurations. This made the option of manually brute forcing the machine or guessing the machine settings impossible. This is just a photo of what the rotors inside the Enigma Machine look like and how they're effectively each an alphabet. So how was the Enigma Machine cracked? Well, despite what movies like The Imitation Game would have you believe, it wasn't originally cracked by Alan Turing. It was actually cracked by the Polish Cipher Bureau in 1938, before World War II had even begun. The Polish Cipher Bureau also invented the bomba cryptologiczna, or cryptologic bomb, that enabled them to trial Enigma Machine settings far quicker than was possible manually. The bomba design was created with some help from French-German spies at the time, who had gotten their hands on an Enigma Machine manual. Just before the beginning of World War II, Nazi Germany made improvements to the Enigma Machine, and the way it was used by adding additional rotors and changing the keys more regularly. This meant that the bomber machine was no longer effective at cracking them. Just before this happened, however, the Polish intercepted and decrypted messages from Nazi Germany indicating the impending invasion of Poland. So in 1939, the Polish Cipher Bureau fled the country and shared their knowledge of Enigma machines and bombers with British and French intelligence. Which brings us to Alan Turing and the other code breakers at Bletchley Park. So utilising the information provided by the Polish Cipher Bureau, the Allied code breakers at Bletchley Park, led by Alan Turing, invented the bomb, which was an upgraded version of the Polish bomber. The bomb would successfully crack the new Enigma machine and calculate their settings before the keys were changed. This marked the beginning of a cryptographic cat and mouse game between Nazi Germany, who kept improving the Enigma machine and increasing the key changes, and Alan Turing-led code breakers who kept improving the bomb machines in response. At one point, the naval Enigma machines were enhanced with the introduction of a fourth active rotor, and for a time this proved uncrackable for the Allied code breakers. However, due to some key intelligence that was captured from a sinking German U-boat, including one of the newly enhanced Enigma machines, the Allied code breakers were able to enhance the bomb machine to such a level that it could both crack the most complex Enigma machines and the even more complicated and recently introduced Lorenz ciphers. This is a photo of one of Alan Turing's bombs, and by the end of World War II there were several hundred of them. So what were the consequences? Well, official war historians estimate that the Allied force code-breaking efforts cut 2 to 3 years off of World War II and saved an estimated 14 to 21 million lives. Also, Alan Turing and other Bletchley Park alumni used what they had learnt inventing and improving the bomb to invent what was arguably the first programmable computer, which has obviously had a massive impact on defining modern-day society as we know it. Which brings us now to present day. So the good news is that the current gold standard encryption algorithms that we use are pretty awesome. They've all been around for a decent amount of time now and have had no or little susceptibility to various cryptographic attacks. To give you an example of the idea of their relative strength against brute forcing attacks, of the algorithms on the screen, RSA or reverse Shamir-Adleman is the weakest per bit of key length. However, it would still take a current conventional computer about 300 trillion years to be able to brute force a 2048-bit key RSA algorithm. Seems pretty secure. But what about these guys? What about quantum computers? Are they a legitimate threat to our modern-day cryptography? To answer that question, we first need to understand how powerful they currently are and could be in the future. This depends primarily on the number of quantum bits or qubits that they have and the stability and error rate of those qubits. So to briefly explain what qubits are and what makes them special, let's compare them to conventional computer bits. So conventional computer bits are binary. They can either be a 0 or a 1 at any given time. Whereas qubits, through the quantum mechanic of superposition, have the ability to be both a 1 and a 0 simultaneously. What that means is that qubits have exponentially more processing power than bits, and for every additional qubit, you're effectively doubling the computational power. So for 1 qubit, you have twice. For 2, you have 4 times the amount. 3, you have 8, 4, 16, and so on. So by the time you get to just 50 qubits, which 50-qubit quantum computer already exists today, it is already more powerful than the most powerful supercomputer in existence. So how long do we have before a really powerful and stable quantum computer exists? Well, there isn't a consensus at the moment, but the common estimates are between 5 and 20 years from now. To give you an example, Google is currently aiming to have a 1,000 stable qubit computer built by 2029. As far as who will have them first, that's a race between the tech giants of the world, like Microsoft, IBM, and Google, and the world's most powerful governments, 15 of which at the present time, have an active quantum computer program. So what does that mean for today's encryption? Well, the good news is that AES 256 is already quantum resistant, and quantum computing would only be able to reduce the effective key size down to 128, which is still considered secure. The bad news is all of the commonly used asymmetric encryption algorithms, such as the ones on the screens, will all be brute forceable. To give you an example, the 2040-bit key RSA encryption algorithm that took the conventional computer 300 trillion years will now take about 10 seconds for a 4,000 qubit quantum computer to brute force. So what are the consequences if all of our current asymmetric encryption is no longer secure? Well, in their current states, TLS would no longer be viable, so there goes the most common secure communication method over the internet. There'd also be no secure way to exchange symmetric keys online, which would nullify much of the effectiveness of quantum-resistant symmetric encryption like AES. Also, digital signatures and certificates would no longer be reliable or trusted, so there goes all of the public key infrastructure. From a cyber warfare perspective, if an adversary was able to build a stable quantum computer, they would effectively be able to decrypt any data in transit or that they had captured, and impersonate a trusted source. Both of these would be a tremendous advantage in the context of war. So what can be done about it? Well, the good news is the hunt for post-quantum cryptography is already well underway, and several families of quantum-resistant cryptography already exist. In fact, since 2016, the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, has been working towards assessing and standardizing post-quantum asymmetric cryptography algorithms. They're currently down to the final 7 submissions and are estimated to have selected the new standards and published them by 2024. Up there's just a link if you'd like to learn more about that. So to finish my presentation, I wanted to leave you with some food for thought about some of the other possible cybersecurity implications of quantum computing. Things like what the password length requirements might need to be, the compatibility and hardware issues that post-quantum cryptography might introduce, or what quantum malware might look like in the future. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. Were there any questions? Awesome. Thank you very much.